The first thing I wanted to talk about tonight is that the Supreme Court today issued a decision that is bad. It's not as bad as it could be, but it is bad. And, when I was scrolling through the news today, this is the case that did not get as much media attention as some of the other things they decided today. So I wanted to kind of talk about what this case is about and what the Supreme Court just ruled. And so let me back up just a little bit, because this is all about a group called Catholic Charities and whether or not they're eligible for a certain tax break. So let me back up for a second. And I know I made a video about this months and months ago, but it's been a while. So maybe you don't know. So there's a law called the Wisconsin Unemployment Compensation Act. And basically what it means is if you are an employer in the state of Wisconsin, you have to give some money to the government in taxes to help pay for eligible citizens to get temporary benefits when they're out of work. So all employers have to pay into the system. But in 1972, religious nonprofits were declared exempt from that law. Specifically, the law said that nonprofits that are run by a church or ministry and that operate, and this is important, primarily for religious purposes, do not have to pay into the system. Now, in 2023, a court basically ruled that the Catholic Charities Bureau, along with 4 of its subgroups, they are not eligible for that exemption. Like, everyone knows they are run by the Catholic Diocese of Superior, but there was disagreement over whether their work was religious in nature. For example, groups that were aligned with the Catholic Charities, they do things like job placement and food services and helping people with developmental disabilities. And those are all wonderful things, and I appreciate that they're doing it. And the CCB, Catholic Charities Bureau, they said that their goal was to help the poor and the disadvantaged, and they said this is an extension of our faith. But the thing about that is that helping the poor and the disadvantaged is not inherently a religious thing. Secular people do that too, right? So just because those groups are overseen by the Catholic Church, it doesn't necessarily mean they are there to advance Catholicism. Like, they're not actively promoting their faith. They're not directly promoting it. They're not proselytizing. You don't have to be a Catholic to work for them. You don't have to be a Catholic to receive the benefits of the work they are doing. So the question is, do they deserve a tax exemption that's meant to benefit religious organizations when the work that they are doing is pretty much secular? I mean, it's good work that they're doing, but it is secular. So for decades, the Catholic Charities Bureau paid the unemployment taxes because they said the work we do is not religious. It's charitable, it's educational, it's rehabilitative, but it's not religious, right? But in 2015, they said, we could save some money if we apply for this tax break. So they applied for it and they got rejected. And over the next several years, that decision was reversed and then reversed again. And in courts, they would have a ruling that goes their way and then the other. And so anyway, this gets up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court last year. This is the Wisconsin Supreme Court that's had some huge battles over Supreme Court justices. Like, the Democrats were facing off against the Republicans, and they got a lot of money because people wanted the Democrats to win. So the Democrats had a 4-3 liberal edge on that state Supreme Court. Well, the Wisconsin Supreme Court heard this case last year, and they arrived at the same conclusion that I just told you, which is that you can't just look at the top of the pyramid and see the Catholic Church at the top and say everything under them is now a religious organization, even when they're not. So they looked at the group's activities, not what their claimed motivations are. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court said when you look at their activities, what they're doing is pretty secular. This is actually what they said. Let me show you this. Here we go. This is what the Wisconsin Supreme Court said. You could see it in the top line. The record demonstrates that Catholic Charities Bureau and the subgroups, the sub-entities, which are organized as separate corporations apart from the church itself, neither attempt to imbue program participants with the Catholic faith, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. Although not required, those would tell us that you're doing something religious. So basically they said, you're not doing anything Catholic-y. right? Everything you're doing, they said, is a wholly secular endeavor. The things you are doing could be done by a secular group the exact same way. The services provided would not differ in any sense. So we conclude that what you are doing is not religious in nature, no matter what you say to the contrary. So there might have been a different outcome if the Catholic Church was running these organizations, but they were not. These are smaller subgroups that do their own thing. They have their own taxes. You know what I mean? The Catholic Church just oversaw it at arm's length. So in Wisconsin, what that meant is charities would have to do a lot more than just like point to a cross to prove they deserve a faith-based exemption under the law, right? So this is a far cry from the US Supreme Court saying Hobby Lobby is Christian because its owners are Christian or something. And you could imagine, and this is important too, imagine what would have happened if the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, yeah, okay, we'll count them as a religious group. Because if they do that, what about like Marquette University or any Catholic-owned hospital that's not necessarily Catholic, but they're owned by the church? Do those employers, which employ a ton of people in the state of Wisconsin, if Catholic colleges and universities that employ a lot of people across the state, if they say, oh, yeah, we're totally Catholic, so we don't have to pay unemployment taxes either, that would be devastating to that entire program. So should they be allowed to get away with it just because they claim to have an affiliation with the Catholic Church? And if you needed any more proof that this group was really trying, like the Catholic side was really trying to push religion, just look at this argument made by one of the dissenting judges in Wisconsin, Rebecca Bradley. She opened up her dissent by quoting the Bible, as if to really say, you guys, everything these groups are doing is religious. I don't know why you open up a secular legal opinion with the Bible verse unless you want nobody to take you seriously. It's a weird move on her part. So after all of this, that judge I just showed you, the dissenting judge, she said the liberal majority, they were impermissibly entangling the government in the church doctrine. Like as if the government was getting involved with state, as opposed to just saying, doesn't look like there's any church issue over here, right? So and by the way, she said it's unfair that the government is mingling with the church when she's citing a Bible verse to open up her dissent. Utterly crazy. So here's the thing. The right-wing legal groups, they asked the Supreme Court to jump in. They wanted the U.S. Supreme Court to jump in and overturn this ruling because they want Catholic groups or any groups affiliated that say they're affiliated with the Catholic Church to get out of paying taxes. And they're basically arguing that, hey, Supreme Court, we need you to overturn this decision because screwing over the unemployed is also a part of the Catholic faith. I mean, it would negate any goodwill they may have preserved by focusing on helping the less fortunate. But last year, the Supreme Court said, yeah, we're going to hear this case. And earlier this year, they did hear oral arguments in this case. And that was scary because it didn't look great. But the question that people had after the oral arguments is, what is this court going to do? We know it's 6-3 conservative supermajority. Are they going to issue a very narrow ruling that applies just to Wisconsin? Or are they going to use this to say, you know, any group that claims it's religious doesn't have to pay any sort of taxes? Like, how broad are they going to go? And it's scary to think about what they could do with this case. And you can imagine if they overturned the decision, how many charities are going to just race to say, oh, yeah, we're totally affiliated with the church now, so I guess we don't have to pay taxes in our state either. That would be scary. So what happened today? Today, the Supreme Court decided to weigh in. They issued their ruling today, and it was 9-0. All the justices said we are overturning the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision. They said Wisconsin went too far in denying the tax break to the Catholic group. So by punishing Catholic Charities for not proselytizing, the justices wrote, they were helping certain groups. Let me show you what Sonia Sotomayor wrote. She was the judge who wrote the decision here. And you would think if Sotomayor, one of the liberal judges, is writing this decision, that's probably a good sign. Well, let me show you what she wrote here, because this is how she parsed this difference. Wisconsin's exemption, as interpreted by its Supreme Court, thus grants a denominational preference. And what she's basically saying is Wisconsin Supreme Court said, if you proselytize while you help the homeless, if you proselytize, if you force Catholicism upon them, then you would count as religious. You would not have to pay the unemployment taxes. But this group, they did not proselytize. Therefore, you are punishing them for their what they claim is their religious affiliation. Even though they are just acting out their beliefs, you're punishing one group in a way you would not punish the other group. So what she says is, indeed, petitioners' eligibility for the exemption ultimately turns on inherently religious choices, namely whether to proselytize or serve only other Catholics, not secular criteria. So she's saying that's a Catholic group right there. They say they're Catholic, they're doing the work they are wanting to do, be inspired by their Catholic faith. You can't punish them for that and pretend they're not Catholic. And so because of that, she's basically saying the Wisconsin Supreme Court is treating this group differently because of the way they are practicing their religious beliefs. Sotomayor also said this at the very bottom of that page I was showing you. Much like a law exempting only those religious organizations that perform baptisms or worship on Sundays, an exemption that requires proselytization or exclusive service of other Catholics in this case establishes a preference for certain religions based on the commands of their religious doctrine. So she also said, I should point this out because this was a pretty strong message from her. This is the very end of her decision. It is fundamental to our constitutional order that the government maintain neutrality between religion and religion. You can't treat one better than the other. There may be hard calls to make in policing that rule, but this is not one. So she very firmly agrees that Wisconsin was wrong when they denied a tax break to this charity. So what do we do with that? Here's my takeaway, and it's only been one day here, but first, the fact that Sotomayor wrote this decision for the court, that's good compared to if, Sam Alito wrote it. She also crafted a very narrow win for Catholic Charities. At the end of the day, Catholic Charities will get the tax exemption they were seeking. But here's the question that I've been trying to get an answer to all day. Where do other groups go from here? How are they going to use this decision to benefit themselves? Because Sotomayor's ruling requires all of these groups that get a tax exemption to have at least some formal religious connection to some religious group. So it's good news for Catholic Charities. It is disturbing news for everybody else because the fact that it could now open the door to other groups with loose religious ties, that's scary because it means they could start asking for tax breaks as well. So now I go back to a point I raised earlier. What about universities or hospitals that say they are affiliated with a religious organization? In Wisconsin, those are some of the biggest employers in the state. Are they now going to ask for a tax break saying we don't have to pay unemployment taxes? Because that would be bad news. And I don't know if they're going to do that. What happens in other states that have similar laws that say they want a tax break? I don't know either. Now, a lot of groups have weighed in on this. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, they said we're worried about the slippery slope. They said in a press release, hundreds of thousands of employees, including those at Catholic affiliated hospitals, could potentially lose the benefit of unemployment insurance. And that's scary. They actually pointed out that half of the 10 largest Catholic health systems in the United States could now potentially claim exemptions from unemployment insurance. That would be disturbing. Americans United for Separation of Church and State said that this ruling favors the purported religion of companies and organizations over protections for individual workers. The American Humanist Association said the ruling broadens the realm of what conduct is considered religious practice and invites allegations of discrimination into any effort to regulate religiously adjacent conduct. And here's the thing, I read through all those statements after the ruling came out. None of them are actually saying what's going to happen because they don't know. That's not a knock on them. Frankly, no one knows what's going to happen because we don't know how this decision is going to be used to further destroy the social safety net. But given the sort of people who are celebrating this decision, you have to think that destruction is kind of guaranteed. I just don't know how they're going to do it. So it's a narrow ruling, could have been much worse, but we don't really know how right-wing groups are going to use this decision to get out of paying taxes if they believe, oh, our religion gives us a get out of paying taxes free card. And how many other states are going to try to do something with this? We don't know yet. So it's a bad decision. It's an unfortunate ruling, even if you think maybe there's some merit there. Like, the bottom line is a Catholic group fought to get out of helping people who need unemployment benefits, and they won because they're Catholic, and that should disturb everybody. I don't know why religious groups should be exempt from paying unemployment benefits when they benefit from that system, because we're all better. Rising tide lifts all boats, right? So disturbing ruling, but I wanted to put that out there. I'm going to pause here for some questions before I move on to a different story. What do we got? I appreciate the donation. I've yet to toss a donation your way. I often enjoy listening while I do other stuff, so this is a belated thank you. Thanks, one-eyed heathen. I appreciate that. A wholly secular endeavor. You know what? When I said that, when the Wisconsin Supreme Court said what the charities are doing is a wholly secular endeavor, WHOLLY, an entirely secular endeavor. Sorry about that. My bad. I might be wrong in thinking this, but I fear if we broadly tax churches, then they will demand formal representation in government. That's my concern. You know, I've said this before, but I don't think we should tax churches because I don't think we should tax nonprofit organizations. I think it's good that nonprofits, which in theory are supposed to help the community doing work that for-profit companies are never going to do, we want to reward them. We want them to do more of it. So we want them to not have to pay taxes, and we want people donating to them to be able to write off those donations on their taxes. But if we're going to apply that to nonprofit groups, the same rules should apply to churches as well, which means every nonprofit should have to file the same paperwork that says, this is how much money we took in. This is where it's going. The ACLU has to do that. Churches do not. And I don't know why churches are allowed to get this better treatment, this less transparent treatment, that they should not be able to do. So I don't want to tax churches, but I do want them treated the same as other nonprofits. Sotomayor wrote the main opinion. It's just a cluster. I really don't think the court is thinking this through, creating basic tax shelter for religious people. What I have heard from people I generally trust on these matters is right now, if you're in the 3-person liberal minority on the Supreme Court, a lot of your work is playing defense. So if Sonia Sotomayor is authoring this opinion, that's probably because it could have been much worse, but she was able to make sure the ruling was as narrow as it could have been. That's a good thing, because you hate to think what would have happened if a conservative justice got their hands on this and got to speak for the entire court, how much more they would have blown up the system. So maybe I don't like the ruling, but it's possible, and we don't know the machinations of the court, it's possible, seeing the writing on the wall, that liberals were going to lose this case. Sotomayor said, all right, I agree. I will take on the writing of this decision. And what she wrote is kind of the least worst version of what it could have been. And all the other justices signed on to it. I mean, I believe Justice Clarence Thomas and Ketanji Brown Jackson issued concurrences on this thing, but they didn't go out of their way to say, like, Sotomayor's ruling was wrong. So again, it could have been worse. Maybe this is their way of avoiding, the worst that it could have been. You have to imagine if, like, Sotomayor wrote the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, we might not be in such a bad spot. But Alito wrote it, so it was really bad. You know what I mean?